Welcome to the Hollywood Scholar. I'm Jed Morgan, and I just finished Witcher Season 3, Volume 1. As many of you know, I'm a big Witcher fan. I love the books, I love the video games. I'm not a lore expert, I'm not an expert. I would never call myself an expert in any franchise, but The Witcher is definitely one of the ones that I know the best, with the main exception being Doctor Who. I love this universe, I love these characters, and you can check out on this channel my recap of The Witcher Novel 2, The Time of Contempt, which this season supposedly adapts, so that you know the true history and the true story of The Witcher, because this season, as with the last couple, has had no similarities with the source material whatsoever. As much as lore and history has claimed that this season would be the most accurate season thus far, it was not. I would say Season 2 might be more accurate. I had a debate with Mustang Rider, who was watching the show with me, on whether or not this show got up to 5% accuracy. He believed it was only 1%. I believed it was a couple more percentage, because there are the occasional scenes, and I mean that literally, occasional scenes which are taken from the books, but with the dialogue swapped out for terrible writing, and the point and meaning behind the scenes changed to such a degree that these scenes are accurate in the sense this person and this person are in the same room together at this point. That's about as accurate as it gets. So it's very much on the level of Rings of Power and Blood Origin when it comes to accuracy, but it also compares to those shows when it comes to quality, because from every single aspect of the show, it's unclear where the massive budget for this season went. It did not go into the production of this volume because the sets were cheap. Everything looked like wood. Geralt's costumes looked like varying degrees of black pleather, and Yennefer looked like she got most of her wardrobe from JCPenney's or other such modern store. There was so little quality in everything, from the set design, from the music, none of which stood out with the exception of one song which should not have stood out, which I will get to at a later point when we get to episode 5. But overall, it's baffling how bad this season was, because it is far worse than Season 2. It is far worse than Blood Origin, in my estimation. Every single actor, including Henry Cavill, who we know is a talented actor, phoned in their performances at the very best. There was not a degree of quality that I found in it. And as a lot of people who I watched this show with who weren't book fans, the biggest thing that they said, it was boring. Nothing happened. They did an interesting technique where they had so many scenes cut together so quickly together that your brain kind of tells you, oh, a lot's happened, a lot must have happened. But then when you think about it, nothing's actually moved forward. There's no actual plot. It's just scene, but nothing is happening. They're throwing so much at you, but none of it is of any substance whatsoever, so the story doesn't exist beyond a pale caricature of a standing story. The narrative in this series is broken. Nothing even makes sense from a fundamental level. Even the world building which they established in previous seasons contradicts what they have here, and the magic has degraded into Avatar, The Last Airbender magic rules. I'm talking like there's little Fire Nation dudes, people who, he's a fire mage, and the rules of magic, oh, fire magic is really difficult. And you said the same thing about earth being really hard, and water's really hard too. They're acting like this is Avatar The Last Airbender. And that makes a lot more sense, because the actress for Yennefer said that she used Bollywood water dancing as inspiration for how she does it. I believe that is her quote. And that makes a lot more sense here because of how they changed the magic of the universe. Overall, this is not The Witcher. This is not a good story, and I'm coming from the book perspective, but everyone who watched the show with me, who we got up to about 8 people watching it, and I'll have a video of that breakdown where we all watched it together, edited up for copyright, up on my channel very, very soon. We all really despised it from varying degrees of expertise on the show. It was just so boring, so little happened. The 4 hours, 5 hours that we spent watching it felt like an eternity. By the end, we could barely remember what happened in the first episode. But from this point on, I will be getting to spoilers, so spoiler ahead. I'm just gonna go briefly through each of these 5 episodes as quickly as I can, because I don't want to be talking about this any more than you want to be listening to how bad this story is. Once again, everything looks incredibly cheap. The first episode is Geralt, Ciri, and Yennefer on the run from everyone who's hunting them, and they're going from one random house to another. They live in an adobe stucco house, like they're in New Mexico and Arizona for some reason, and they're just on the run for most of the episode before Ryan catches up to them and they lay a trap for him. But my issues with this episode is they brought back the Dear Friend letters, which should have happened way sooner in the series, and don't make as much sense, because in the Dear Friend letters, Geralt wasn't sure if Yennefer and him were still in a relationship, and he was unsure how to sign his letter to her, so he just kind of nervously said dear friend. And then when Yennefer replied, she was pissed off by that dear friend and sarcastically used it in response. But Yennefer initiates the dear friend letters in this show, and it's earnest, like, dear friend, please love me, please come back to me, please forgive me for trying to kill your adopted daughter. And what makes it so much more awkward is that they're basically living together. She keeps passing Geralt these notes when he's not looking, these dear friend letters, as they're on the run from one random empty house to another. It does not work in the story. It feels like a appeasement offering to the fans of the books. Like, see, we did a book thing. Well, it doesn't make any sense. The writing was changed. The purpose, origin, and meaning of all these things was changed to such a degree that it barely compares and barely draws any inspiration from the source material when they use a few moments from it. And that's the thing that happens every time they get even a little bit book accurate, is they warp it to such a degree that it doesn't mean the same thing and offers very little, performed by actors who don't care. So I hate even the few brief book moments we get. It is really baffling how bad that they could do this, and Dear Friend letters are just one example of it. Moving on, we get introduced to Robbie Amel's new character, who's an elf fighter with the Scoia'tael, working for Francesca. That whole storyline's not from the book whatsoever. Francesca's scuff is blown out of proportion. She's looking for Ciri because Ciri's gonna save the elves for some reason. That's not in the books either. And his voice just sounds like Batman for some reason, and he's got a mohawk. There's a lot of stuff like that that doesn't make sense in fantasy. They keep forgetting, just like with Rings of Power and Blood Origin, this is a medieval fantasy show. Those are medieval fantasy shows. They don't have current day technologically advanced hair buzzers or any other way to make advanced leathers like pleather for Geralt. They can't remember what century that they're in and what level of technology that exists. It's baffling how dumb these people are and how little that they care for both the source material and accuracy. And even going even further, they don't care about continuity. They don't care about quality. These people clearly are either incompetent to the 9th degree or don't care, or perhaps even both. But moving on, there's a lot of weird stuff going on with the festival of Beltane that they include in the first episode. Ciri, Geralt, and Yennefer decide to go to this random festival, even though Geralt says it's a bad idea, but they do it anyway. And it's like, all right, we'll go, but Ciri, you've got to wear a mask so no one knows who you are. So guess what they do for her mask? They don't cover up her very iconic hair. They don't put her in an actual mask like Yennefer wears. They give her a mask on a stick that she briefly holds up before throwing it away to go dance with some other kids. They barely even nod at the fact that she's easily recognizable. And then there's a random fight with a made-up monster, and it's just incredibly stupid, all of which is delivered with some of the worst dialogue. That's going to be a repeating theme in this review, is the dialogue for this entire show is atrocious. It really is impressive, especially Yarpen at the end of this episode. He's like, I like our odds better. This is too easy during a fight sequence. What is happening? This is CW level bad. CW would be embarrassed to have this level of poor writing on their platform. And we all know that is saying something. It is worse than CW when it comes to the emotions and the constant walking and talking about nothing whatsoever, and emotions that are written by robots who don't understand how human emotions actually work, especially with the romances. The romance scenes and the flirting, especially between Jaskier and the teenage boy who's been aged up to being barely legal, Prince Radovid, the two of them together, their flirting is like robots watched a few teenage rom-coms and they're like, this is how we flirt. We are flirting now. That's as good as it got. The writing was all over the place. The writers just went, oh, this is an exposition scene. Here, card out a few dozen paragraphs about exposition that's not needed and just dump it out and have nobody really react to it, and then we'll move on. It's so inconsistent. The scenes are all over the place. The pacing is abysmal. But moving on a little bit more, because they know Rience is on their tail, Geralt, Yennefer, and Ciri decide to set a trap for him at Sharonwood, where they try to pull some stuff from the first novel, which they bastardize and isn't supposed to be here whatsoever, but that's another Easter egg for the book fans. We took this random reference from a previous book that shouldn't be here, changed what it meant, and just kind of stitched it into our Frankenstein's monster and said, don't you like it? Don't you like what we gave you? You said you wanted book accuracy. This is book accuracy. No, having a random scene take place at Sharonwood does not make it book accurate whatsoever. But the context of the episode makes it so much worse. When we initially saw the clip, I assumed that Ciri was on her own for some reason. Geralt and Yennefer were hurrying to try to get to her in time, so Ciri was forced to fight Rience and his men for a few minutes on his own before they arrived. No, Geralt and Yennefer are literally waiting in the same ruins as the fight is taking place. They're within sight of Ciri. and they just casually watch from a distance. They're like, oh, she's fighting. Isn't that cute? Oh, you're doing such a great job. You go, girl. And they wait for like 2 minutes before they decide, you know what, we should probably help our adopted daughter against a bunch of scary people who want to kidnap her. That'd probably be a good idea. I guess if we have to. It's so much worse with context. And again, like I predicted in that clip breakdown, if Geralt had just taken Rience through the portal at the end of it and kept him with them, he wouldn't have a plot line in episode 2 that led him into another made-up plot line for the season. It's so dumb. Characters make no logical decisions. The scenes aren't connected by logic. The continuity is abysmal. It's so convoluted that it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I'm baffled that this got past any sort of quality control officers, because this looks like it was written by 12-year-olds. In fact, I wrote better stuff when I was 12. It is really quite impressive how bad this season is. This season is very well below some of the worst fantasy that I have ever seen. It is so much worse than all of that. Moving on to episode 2, none of this was really book accurate. It's a little bit more than the last episode, with a couple scenes that are randomly cherry-picked, convoluted as all the other book accurate stuff. And I don't want to talk about this episode much because there's very little to talk about in it. But there are a couple things to take away from it. First of all, the time in this episode, which becomes an issue in the later episodes as well, doesn't track in a logical fashion. We have a scene with Jaskier when he goes to see Prince Radovid, who convinces him to betray Geralt, Ciri, and Yennefer for Redania, which is not something he does. Yes, he works for Redanian secret intelligence, but he doesn't betray his loved ones for Redania. That's not something that happens, and they also make him out to be some sort of Scoia'tael freedom fighter, whatever with all that. But in the scene with Prince Radovid, they're flirting, they've made him gay for some reason, whatever, and it's really cringe, the dialogue, especially the romantic flirting dialogue. But this scene is split up, as most of the scenes are. It just randomly stops and then starts up later on. But with this scene, they cut it, and then they show weeks of events. They have Geralt traveling to a distant castle that Codringer and Fen, some lawyers investigating the villains for Geralt, tell him about. They also have Ciri and Yennefer travel from wherever they started the episode with Geralt to the city of Gorsvalen. And then when they cut back, it's still the same time. He just started singing. The first half of that scene ended with Jaskier saying, fine, I'll sing for you. And then the next half starts with him actually singing, and it's the gay love song that we predicted that he would sing for Prince Radovid. But in that split, weeks of events happened for everybody else. And that's something you'll see in all 5 of these episodes, is that time doesn't track in a logical fashion. Distance doesn't track in a logical fashion. There's no reasonable explanation for how people get from one place to another in a certain amount of time connected with each other. It's just garbled nonsense. This season makes so much less logical sense than even season 2, which is an impressive feat. But moving on, that castle that Geralt goes to is abandoned for some reason, and in the basement, he finds a bunch of melted teenage girls that have formed together into some weird flesh monster. And one of the girls is about to be fused in, but she's alive for some reason, and he's able to rescue her from the flesh monster. And apparently a sorcerer has been experimenting on girls kidnapped from the sorceress school of Aretuza and making them into this flesh monster, but at the same time messing with their brains, trying to convince them that they're Ciri. And this girl who he rescues looks a lot like Ciri. Initially, I thought it was just the fake Ciri that gets offered up to Emir at the end of the book, but Geralt never interacted with her. He interacts with the different fake Ciri in the next season, but somehow and coincidentally, he comes across a random girl who looks a lot like Ciri, who's being tortured by the villain he's looking for. And above all that, she happens to be part elven, just like Ciri. There are just so many strings of coincidences set up for this nonsensical plotline which does not exist in the books. It's really quite difficult to follow what's going on because it doesn't make any sense. Moving on to the last thing I want to mention for this episode is Fringilla, who we saw last imprisoned at the end of season 2, is back. And for some inexplicable reason, the Emperor has decided that his prisoners are going to be his wine tasters. And up front, that's not necessarily that bad of an idea. Might as well have them try it. They're expendable in case he's poisoned. But he has 7 wine tasters, or at least a lot of wine tasters, and Fringilla is one of them, and they are perpetually drunk How much is the Emperor drinking if he's got a bunch of prisoners who are perpetually drunk and dying of alcohol poisoning? We see several of them die, at least one of them, and that's how Fringilla eventually escapes in a later episode, is she pretends to have died from alcohol poisoning and slips her body into a body bag of somebody else who actually died. That I want to get into in a later episode because there's more of that that doesn't make any sense, but she's perpetually drunk throughout this episode. How much is Ymir drinking? That doesn't make any sense. Even if they were drinking for the entire court, they're wine tasters. They take a sip, but they were downing the whole glass every single time. They were just chugging that stuff. That's not how you wine taste for poison. And she takes a little bit and she's like, it's not poison. She hands it off to the guard. She's like, please don't make me drink another one. Drink. It's so overdramatic and weird. I've never seen someone tortured like this in a story before. I just can't even describe how dumb this looks. You will all have to check it out because it's quite impressive how nonsensical Fringilla's entire storyline in this volume 1 comes across. Now moving on to episode 3, we gratefully get to move on because we got to go through this as quickly as possible. Jaskier is for some reason in therapy with a girl at the beginning of the season that threw him out of her house and said, hey, I'm allowed to sleep around, but you're not allowed to sleep around. And then they're sleeping together again for some inexplicable reason, and he's just talking about how much he loves Prince Radovid, and she's counseling him and being like his relationship therapist. It's really weird. It's really weird. And he goes on to meet Geralt, and they go meet up with a werewolf and a dryad, even though she doesn't look like a dryad whatsoever, who are going to help Geralt heal the girl, the fake Ciri he found at the end of the last episode. There's some weird stuff with that. I don't really want to go into it because the werewolf is sort of from Season of Storms, but shouldn't be here and doesn't do anything that he does in Season of Storms. It is literally just a werewolf named Otto. That is as accurate as this whole storyline gets, is there's a werewolf in the book called Otto, who's not even remotely involved in any of this, so it's not accurate at all. So we get to move on a little bit more. Yennefer and Ciri go to Jean-Cardi's bank in Gorzelen, and it looks really cheap. It looks really dirty, a weird looking set. Jean-Cardi does not look like a dwarf whatsoever, even though they admit that he is, and they talk for 2 seconds, even though it's an extended conversation with important information from the books before Yennefer just sends Ciri out into the city with a clerk, Fabio. They do a little bit of sort of book stuff where they talk about the Tower of the Ghouls. They see a wyvern who Ciri knows is a wyvern, not a basilisk, as the guy who's captured the wyvern claims that it is. And then the wyvern breaks free and Ciri has to kill it. But the way she does it is baffling. The wyvern does not look like it should. It moves around so fast and immediately gets covered by a banner that Ciri pulls down on it to save on CGI costs before she stabs it with the little baby knife, which in the books she killed it with a sword. Sort of. This would be the sequence that I say is the most accurate to the books, but it's so warped and twisted with terrible dialogue, poor acting, and nonsensical changes that it still doesn't get any positive points from me whatsoever. And a weird addition to this is Missile was here. And for those of you who know the books, Missile is a member of the Rats, which is an outlaw group that exists in the southern Nilfgaard area. And they claim to be Robin Hood-esque type people, but they're really violent. They're really bad. Missile straight up sexually assaults Ciri at the end of this book. But for some reason, she's not at the far reaches of the southern Nilfgaardian border. She's, for some reason, all the way up in Gorzelen, which is thousands and thousands of miles away. Some reason she's here, some reason she interacts with Ciri, and for some reason she's going to make it all the way back down to where Ciri teleports. In a couple days, Ciri has to teleport from Gorzelen area, actually the Isle of Thanedd and the Tower of the Ghouls, but that's pretty close to Gorzelen, has to teleport from there to the Korath Desert, which is near where she meets up with Missile at the end of the books. For some reason, Missile just is going to teleport back there too, even though she doesn't have those capabilities. It makes no logical sense for Missile to be here, and they have a little bit of flirty interactions. They do have a relationship in the next book. It's so all over the place. It doesn't make any sense. They just wanted to include her a little bit sooner because Missile is getting her own spin-off. The new Rats spin-off TV show called Riff Raff will be following her and the Rats. Ciri runs away from the scene where she killed the wyvern. That's when we meet up with Sabrina and Margarita. This is not what's supposed to be happening. Those aren't the witches that are involved, but it's really aggressive. Margarita, who is described in the books as being so beautiful that nymphs and goddesses would be jealous of her naked form, which Ciri does see in the next scene with the bathhouses. All the naked sorceresses are bathing together as they talk politics. That's what's supposed to happen, instead of the kind-hearted, loving Margarita, who's one of the few people who shows any kindness to Ciri. We get an aggressive, hey, I'm gonna slap you, I'm gonna beat you, oh, you're so terrible, you're so bad, oh my god. She's so aggressive and mean to Ciri, and throughout the rest of the season that we see her, she's the same way. They took Margarita, they race swapped her, they fat plussed her, and they made her an uber bitch. That's what they're doing to these characters. They're all so desecrated that they barely resemble who they're supposed to be, with the exception of their names. That is the only thing that is accurate about The Witcher, is names. That is the only 100% lore thing I will give to The Witcher Season 3, is they got the names right. Oh my god, they got the names right. Isn't that so amazing, guys? We should herald Netflix for their adaptation integrity. They got some of the characters' names right. That is so impressive these days. Sarcasm over. That is the best that we've gotten from the Witcher Netflix universe when it comes to season 3, is they got the names right. That is it. But moving on, there's some emotional, joking stuff with Ciri being treated like shit. Yes, she does get treated like shit a little bit, but she's more in tune to it. It makes more sense in the books. It's just Marguerite being a bitch in the show, and she runs away because of it. Yes, she does run away in the book. That is sort of lore accurate, but they change the meaning behind it, why she ran away, and more importantly, they change Yennefer caring. Ciri rides away, she gets chased by the Wild Hunt, and for some reason, Geralt knows that she's randomly on this track and swoops in to save her from the Wild Hunt, and Yennefer doesn't care. We don't even know that she knows that Ciri's gone until partway through the next episode, where she's casually like, oh yeah, you ran away, I'm sorry I made you do that. She doesn't even react to the girl who she recently admitted in a conversation with, I believe it was Triss, that she was the mother of, leave without any concern. She didn't even react to it. She's like, you know what, I should care about the girl that's entrusted to my care, who I consider to be my daughter. I should care about her, but I want to do politics instead. I want to bring the conclave together. I want to save the North. She doesn't even react. She doesn't even react. She just moves on. We don't even get to see her hear the news. It is so weird that we don't get this, and that doesn't continue in the next episode. We don't get this in the next episode either. Yennefer just is like, oh, I guess my responsibilities with Ciri are over. I assume she's made her way to Geralt. I just got some politics to do because I'm really influential, and it's more important that I'm powerful and smart and influential and people like me than I be a mother. It's aggressively bad when it comes to character. Her character is so broken that her being evil and trying to kill Ciri doesn't seem all that unusual anymore. They've characterized her to be an awful, awful person that Geralt should kill. Yennefer's done just as much bad and disrespectful as any of the other sorcerers and villains that Geralt comes across. But no, she's the best as ever, guys. We gotta love her. Oh, she had a sad childhood. Oh, that must mean we should forgive her all the mistakes that she makes. And the show barely even recognizes most of those mistakes, and they add on mistakes that weren't even hers. It's nonsensical the way that they stitch together Yennefer's characterization. But one final thing I want to mention in episode 3 is we get some stuff with Philippa and her lesbian handmaiden in Redania. In the previous episode, we saw her being in some weird sexual BDSM therapy with Dijkstra, but she has sex with this woman who is a trans person who identifies as they, them, he, who plays a woman in the show. It doesn't make sense even by woke standards. They're not lesbians even by woke standards, and it just comes out of the blue. We never even see these people flirt. We never even see them interact, but they're suddenly in bed together and they're like, oh yeah, we love each other so much. It's so amazing. And then we never see them interact with each other again. It just feels like we had to throw in a lesbian scene so people didn't think that she was having sex with Dijkstra. It just came out of nowhere. And they just casually talk about the assassination of the queen that they just did together. Some really, really weird, off-putting stuff that comes out of nowhere. But we move on to episode 4 here, and Triss, in a previous episode, 2 or 3 episodes before, randomly went into a young girl's room. They never explained why she's there, and she sees blood on the wall, but she finally tells someone about it. Now, after 2 or 3 episodes, she randomly runs up to Tissaia, and Yennefer's like, Oh my god, girls are disappearing. Oh, don't worry, she's probably just in the city. No, there's blood on her walls. We need to care about this. Triss, if you cared about it, you probably should have told someone 2-3 episodes ago. Why did you wait this long? And this makes a weird side plot with Triss investigating the disappearance of this girl, which is connected to Geralt and the weird flesh monster, and Istrid, which was Yennefer's ex-boyfriend from season 1, who shouldn't be in the show at all, is also investigating what's going on with Triss, and he's looking for the Book of Monolith that was introduced in Witcher Blood Origin, which is not from the source material whatsoever, and he knows that it's here on the island. It's just so convoluted with everything that Triss is doing. But we get back to Geralt and Ciri as they try to make their way to the Isle of Thanedd. The geography of this entire episode doesn't make any sense because for some reason they have to ride a ferry back to Thanedd, which does make sense. Thanedd is on an island, but there is a bridge to get there. But Ciri didn't need to ride a ferry from wherever she was in Gors Velen to wherever Geralt was, which should have been Hirmden. They're just randomly on a ferry because we gotta have a boat action sequence for some inexplicable reason, where we meet Valdo Marx, who's gonna be the troubadour for the banquet, and Jaskier's really jealous of him, and they sing, like, at first, a bunch of gospel singers, and then, like, a barbershop quartet, and then later on they dance like modern dancers, like straight up something you'd see in a Los Angeles nightclub, which draws in a monster that Ciri, of course, dispatches with epic skill, even though the entire fight scene doesn't make any sense whatsoever. She just shimmies along the wall right up against the monster. Her sword disappears, it reappears. She gets the killing blow. Geralt just kind of stands there and watches her for most of it. It is really horrendously done at that fight sequence, as with every single fight scene of this entire show. There's roughly one fight scene per episode, and they're all incredibly short, and they're done in the dark, so any monsters, the CGI can be easily covered up by how extremely dark it is. Everything is cut so short. Anytime we get something interesting, it gets cut away that it's ultimately worthless. Ultimately worthless. This entire boat thing was entirely pointless. If you cut out the boat thing, you would miss nothing. It's 20 minutes of the episode. There is so much bloat in this show, especially in the final episode. Episode 5 has more bloat than anything else I've ever seen. But they get to this random area where they call Loxia. Loxia is supposed to be a palace, not some random farm where they decide to leave Ciri, which doesn't seem like a good idea, but they do, and Radovid finds them. Radovid just shows up. Radovid's just like, oh, hey, Jaskier, how's it hanging? How did he get there? How did he know where they are? That cabin is defended by magical spells, Yennefer says. He should not have even known where they are, let alone been able to reach them. It doesn't make sense that the Prince of Redania, who should be accompanied by a entourage everywhere he goes, bodyguards everywhere he goes, finds a random forest cabin. And he shouldn't be here anyway because he's supposed to be a teenager, but whatever. It's just so that we can see Jaskier and Radovid make out aggressively. That was the whole point of that nonsense. There's no logical explanation for why he's there, but we gotta have a gay kiss, everyone. Screw logic. It's Pride Month. One final thing to mention in this episode is throughout the season, we've gotten little glimpses of the messenger Applegat, which is something from the books. In chapter 1 of the book, which had only been the first episode, we see a few moments of him. He accidentally crosses the path of Ciri and Yennefer on their way from the Temple of Melitele to Gors Velen. He sees Geralt on 2 separate occasions, and he even shows some bravery in standing up to some assassins who are looking for Ciri, and he ultimately dies after having his death prophesied by Ciri. There's a lot of interesting stuff there. He's the vessel for the audience to see what's going on in the world. He's the one who we see that Nilfgaard is preparing for another invasion, perhaps. The North is preparing to defend themselves. There's some stuff with some boats. There's some interesting stuff we see through his eyes. It gives a lot of world building through Applegat. That's Applegat's point in the story, ultimately dying at the hands of a random Scoia'tael. We don't get that at all. Throughout these first 4 episodes, we randomly see him, and then just for some reason, they cut back to him, and he's riding through the woods on his own, shouting at the top of his lungs his ultra-secret messages that he's supposed to remember, because his big thing is gotta have a head of gold and an ass of steel. Being a messenger, ass of steel to be able to ride so long, and a head of gold to be able to remember all the secret messages. He's shouting them as he rides. He's just like, well, this is what we're going to do. The super secret, top secret stuff, I'm going to shout it in the woods. And then he dies, and we don't even see who kills him. It's incredibly pointless. They took Applegat, who had a point in the story, and made him pointless, wasting even more of the audience's time. I cannot believe how pointless Applegat was. And in episode 1, when we got Ciri's prophecy of his death, in the books, Ciri goes into a trance and says his death. She actually prophesies his death, and then her brain takes back over and she doesn't even remember doing it and goes about her day. In this one, she just stares at Applegat, has some visions and stuff and random images that don't even relate to him. More stuff with Gahir and flashbacks to earlier storylines with her. And then Yennefer comes up and is like, "Oh, this girl, she got hit in the head by a horse and she's stupid," and then berates her for drawing attention to herself. It doesn't work in a visual medium. And they just made Applegat's story pointless. And that really bothers me because Applegat was a really important character in the first chapter of Time of Contempt. The world building was important, and they threw that away entirely just to be like, "Hey, book fans, we gave you what you wanted. You wanted a messenger named Applegat. Well, here he is." Not if you make everything from the books pointless, throwaway, cheap, convoluted messes. If you do that once per episode, that doesn't buy you our forgiveness. That doesn't make us somehow believe that this season is accurate to the source material. In fact, it makes us more angry because it means you actually know the source material. You know the book well enough to tear it apart in this excruciating of detail. You knew Applegat existed, so you read the book, and yet you still chose to do everything you did desecrating the source material. That makes it so much worse. But we get to the final episode. And in a lot of ways, I believe it might very well be the worst one, because this is when the banquet at Thana takes place, which is a big part of, I believe it is chapter 3 of the book. And a lot does happen. There's a lot of important stuff, a lot of people trying to manipulate Geralt, but they take away a lot of that to make it that Geralt and Yennefer are manipulating everybody else to get proof that Stregobor is the one torturing those girls and is the real villain behind all this, and not Vilgefortz. And it's just awkward, and what makes it so much worse is it's told exclusively through flashbacks. We get Geralt and Yennefer in bed in a bunch of different positions as they recant different scenes, and we get stuff over and over and over again. I'm talking like we see the same scenes over and over and over again. If this episode were told in chronological order and not by a psychotic person, this episode would be about 15-20 minutes long. They drag those 15-20 minutes into an hour because they just keep replaying the same stuff over and over again. It's infuriating. And what makes it so much worse is the song that I mentioned being sung by Valdo Marx. They sing the same line over and over again in every single flashback. It's not just like at the same point in the flashback so you know when everything is taking place. No, they just sing it on repeat. They say it at least 3 or 4 times per flashback. They sing, "All is not as it seems." 2 seconds later, "All is not as it seems. All is not as it seems. All is not as it seems." We get it. People are lying at this banquet. There's a lot of manipulation and politics and scheming and machinations and manipulation going on here. We don't need you to sing it to us for 50 minutes over and over and over again. We got it. We understood what you were trying to do. You thought you were clever, but you weren't subtle. This whole song was about as subtle as a brick to the face. Please, for the love of God, take that song out of the episode. We were all grinding our teeth. By the 40th time, they said, "All is not as it seemed," in a monotone. The singer wasn't good either. He just monotoned his way through singing it. We just heard it played in the background on repeat as Ciri and Yennefer told each other the same thing over and over again. And in one of the scenes where Geralt and Yennefer are talking in bed about the flashbacks, they built a blanket fort. They're underneath the covers and they put up the blankets to cover them entirely and prop them up, and it looks like a blanket fort. It's really weird, but in the actual banquet, there's some weird stuff. There's some conniving, there's some scheming that just play over and over again. None of it actually means anything. None of it's of substance. None of it's book accurate. And it's just so very, very boring. There's a weird dance sequence where they all dance with each other and they're compelled by magic to do it, but only some people are, some people aren't, and it's just really awkward. A lot of people are thirsting for Geralt, which is book accurate, but they take it 10 steps too far, making it infuriating. And then Geralt and Istrid have a fake fight to distract everyone that looks incredibly fake and is distracting. And all the flashbacks culminate in Yennefer and Geralt realizing that Stregobor, the person who, during the flashbacks, they had gotten evidence on and gotten arrested because he was the one torturing the girls, they come to the realization that he was framed. That he's just some racist who hates half-elven girls and is torturing them because he hates elven women for some reason. And he's not actually doing any of the mind control stuff with Ciri. It's connected for some baffling reason. And the reason that they figure out it's actually Vilgefortz who's the villain behind everything and not Stregobor is because the girl that Geralt rescued back in episode 2 from the flesh monster was saying random stuff, and one of the things that she said was there was this girl with a funny voice that was involved in her torture, and Geralt realizes, oh, the girl with the funny voice, that must be Lydia, because she can't talk except for with telepathy. And they realize that Vilgefortz is connected to her because she wears the same type of jewelry as the jewelry given to Tisaya by Vilgefortz. He gave his assistant and his girlfriend the same type of jewelry, and they use that as proof that he's the big bad. That's the big climactic reveal before Geralt runs out of his room to capture Vilgefortz or tell everyone or something, and Dijkstra pulls a knife on him. That is where the volume ends. That is the cliffhanger, is Dijkstra's got a knife to Geralt's throat. What a climactic way to end the volume. What great action, what great storytelling, what great writing. This volume is one of the worst things I've ever seen, and I have little doubt that volume 2 will be substantially worse. This volume was so boring. Nothing happened. There was not an ounce of quality in it. I cannot think of a single scene that I enjoyed or thought was any good whatsoever. Every performance was either phoned in or delivered by a bad actor or actress. Every scene of writing was full of crappy dialogue, pointless talking, emotions to the 9th degree, designed by robots who don't understand emotions. The sets were cheap. The cinematography was cobbled together like someone who had no understanding of how cameras work. And the editing was so all over the place. The scene in episode 2 where Triss finds the blood on the wall should have been at the beginning of episode 4 when she goes and tells everyone about the blood she found. She shouldn't have decided to forget about it for weeks. It's just a mess. None of it makes any sort of logical, coherent sense. The characters make baffling decisions. It is broken on every single level and bloated to such a degree that this entire volume could be probably about an hour long, if that, with important information. I feel like I wasted my time. I entirely wasted my time, and so did everybody else who watched it with me, but you'll get to see our reactions to it once I get it all edited up for copyright purposes. I'll publish that out, but for right now, I'm giving The Witcher Season 3, Volume 1, a 1 out of 10, and I'm only giving it that because I feel like Volume 2 is going to be so much worse. This is beyond Blood Origin levels. This is beyond Rings of Power levels of crap. This is without doubt the worst thing I've ever seen. And I know that might seem biased coming from me as such a big book fan, but a lot of the people I watched it with who will be able to see our reactions to, they're not book fans, and they all had the same reactions as I did. Dermy Wormy, Ryan from Legion Games, they're not book fans. Rachel from Adeline Crafting, they're not book fans. They don't know the source material, but they had the same reaction. And Mustang, who knows the source material a little bit, he had the same reactions. We all saw this as an utter tragedy, and I have little doubt that it will be responded to with as much hate and vitriol as we all shared because of how horrendous and atrocious it was cobbled together. And I have little doubt that Henry Cavill reading the scripts for Season 3 is what caused him to quit as soon as he could, because these scripts are some of the worst things I have ever seen in my entire life. But I would love to know what you guys think in the comments below. Are you going to watch it? Are you out when Henry Cavill leaves the show? Do you think the viewership for this season will be any good whatsoever? I'd love to hear what you all think in the comments down below. But that is all that I have for today, and I will see you guys on the next video. Anon.
Hey, yo, are you feeling what I'm doing up in here? Oh, I know you are. Do you miss all the good, compelling stories that we used to get back in Hollywood that they ain't putting down no more? I know you missing it. So check out my book series, Odyssey of a Phoenix, a mythological epic about philosophy, morality, and modern-day mental illness issues, baby. Book 1, Down in Flames. Book 2, Apocalypse Then. These are currently on sale. What are you waiting for? Get your hands on them. And we got Book 3, Kill the Dark, is coming down the pipeline. Just wait for all the good stuff that's dropping. You ain't gonna be disappointed, fam.